Hello and welcome to yesterday's airlines. It can be a challenge keeping track of JC Wing's release announcements, and apparently it's a challenge even for themselves because at the end of July they've made their very latest release announcements and they've labelled them the July releases, but they'd already made July releases earlier in the month, and so clearly these are supposed to be the August releases because there are the 8th set of JC announcements this month. But ignoring that, and sometimes it really does seem like JC Wings just don't know what they're doing, we have a brand new batch of JC Wings announcements here, 15 models to look through and rank in the usual style. And that's what we'll be up to in this video. So stay tuned for that. Before we do that, don't forget to chuck a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate everyone who's watching the vids. Thank you very much, and I hope you're enjoying the content. Also, don't forget to check out my sponsor for this video, Northeast Diecast. I've been shopping with them now for quite a bit of time, and they've got a fabulous selection of 200 scale and 400 scale models, secondhand mostly, but they're increasingly getting some new stuff too. And there's almost always going to be something that will interest you on their site. I know I've been picking up quite a few models from them. So check out Northeast Diecast, and when you do, don't forget to use the all-important discount code Yesterday's Airlines 15 for 15% off your order at Northeast Diecast. But let's get on and get straight into these JC Wings August announcements. Okay, so these JC announcements, they fit the template which has appeared in 2025 and they're sticking to. That is, there is a selection of them, about half this month, which are models which there are photographs of the completed product for, and therefore will be out within 2 to 3 months. And then the second half of the set are models which are marked as future announcements, which will be out who knows when, possibly within 6 to 10 months, more likely within 12, 14 months, but sometimes in 24 months. So you're never quite sure when those ones will turn up. We'll start with the models that have release photos of the actual completed product, and there are 7 of those this month. The first one up is a Cathay Dragon A330 300, and it is registered B Lima Bravo Kilo. Now, Cathay Dragon is probably an airline that most people have already begun to forget about, since with COVID it was merged back into Cathay Pacific, the old Dragonair remnant. But clearly JC have not forgotten about it. This is the second Cathay Dragon A330 in the past 2 years. They made BLBF in 2024, and now we've got LBK, the partner to that one. There isn't a huge amount to say here. My feelings on the JC Wings A330 are that it's pretty mediocre, mainly because of the undercarriage, and I've talked a bit about this recently on Gemini and JC videos, so nothing really going to change there. We've got a selection of photos of the finished product for this model, and it looks just like you'd expect. It looks fine, but it's not spectacular, and those engines are precariously close to the ground. So I think this one is firmly a workhorse model. There have been plenty of Cathay Dragon A330s previously, and I'd argue that several of them have been better than this one. Indeed, I own a Panda model version and a Phoenix version, and I would definitely rank those as superior to this. So that's a workhorse. Next model up is another A330, but this one's a newer A330. It's an A330-900 in the colours of Malaysia Airlines. The registration is 9M Mike November Hotel. And this appears to be a partner to a release that was made for MacBirds, which is the My Hobby House brand. And they had 9M MN Golf made earlier in the year, and now we've got MN Hotel, which is probably the other half of the production run, which JC are going to release more widely. It is, ignoring that MacBirds release, the first time that JC have made an A330-900 in the colours of Malaysia, and the only other one that exists is a Phoenix version from August 2024. Looking at the MacBirds release, which is the only one I've got a good picture for, but I would expect to be exactly the same as this one. I'm not 100% sold on where they're putting the cockpit windows on this A330-900, I have to say. Yeah, it is a re-release of the MacBirds release, which you probably didn't get if you or didn't know existed if you weren't a Malaysian. But there has been the Phoenix version beforehand, and I'm not sold on the print here. So I'm going to put this one into Workhorse as well, frankly. Next up, we've got an A340-300 in the colours of Swiss. It's HB Juliet Mike Bravo. It's exactly the same model that Aviation 400 have literally just announced on their A340-300 mould. Neither of those moulds are spectacular. The JC A340 has some of the issues the A330 does, but it generally looks a little bit better, probably because the engines are a bit smaller. There have been other JC A340s in this colour scheme recently, but slightly different. In May 2025, they announced HBJMA with the red nose. Otherwise, it's the same. And again, if you look at the model, it actually looks quite good, because I do think this A340 looks a little better than the A330. It doesn't suffer as badly from the undercarriage being so short. But is it better than previous releases that have been made by Phoenix? They made Juliet Mike Hotel in January, and that's questionable, I would say. Also, obviously, we've got this NG A340 finally turning up that NG have announced, so it's possible there may be a Swiss one coming. And there have been earlier versions, unsurprisingly, from brands like Aero Classics, Panda Models, Phoenix, so on and so forth. So, yeah, again, I think this one's just a workhorse for me. I'm not so sold on the quality of the mould that I think it's going to be worth putting up higher, and there's been plenty of others beforehand. Moving to the Boeings, and we start with what should be an outstanding release. It is an outstanding release choice, at the very least, and that is a Boeing House Colours 737-900 registered N737X with this technology demonstrator titles on the rear. Now, this aircraft looked pretty cool. I'm always a big fan of house colours, but unfortunately the picture, and it's a really bad picture, but the picture quality that we've got of the actual release model just makes it look rubbish. It's showing all the worst attributes of the JC Gemini 737-800-900. The engines are too close to the ground, they're poorly shaped, the nose gear door's giant, the whole fuselage is a little bit misshapen, cockpit windows don't look good, aerials are too large, all of those things, and it's just looking like a dreadful model. So it's a real shame, because this should be a killer release, and if it was on a better mould it would be, but it so is not, and it's a really unfortunate misstep. And that is one of the problems when you're going with JC Wings, is they are quite happy to keep on releasing models on what are incredibly substandard moulds at times, and this 737-900 is one of those. I'm going to gas guzzle this one. It's a big disappointment for me. Next model's another variant release. This one is an Air Canada 747-400 registered Golf Alpha Golf November, and we had Golf Alpha Golf Mike released as a retailer or a special release for the Canadian market about this time last year. I picked up that model, and I know quite a few people did. This one will obviously get a wider audience, and so that's good in a sense, but it is fundamentally the same as the previous model, which was pretty decent, but I still am not overly thrilled by the length of the undercarriage on the JC 747-400. Having said that, as I said, the version that I picked up, the GM version, was really nice. I gave a review actually at the website here, and I thought it was a really nice model. So yeah, I'll put this one into Workhorse just because it's basically a re-release of a model we've already seen. That leaves us with just two models to discuss in this coming soon batch, and the next one is another Lufthansa Cargo 777-200 interactive series. We had one in a relatively recent set, and now we've got another one, basically. So we've had two in recent sets. We had one towards the end of last year in August, and we had one towards the end of last year in November, and now we've got one in August. This is the third one of these that's coming along. Now, they are all okay, to be honest. They're not bad models by any means. In fact, they're really good models, but the Lufthansa Cargo special schemes here are not overly exciting, and they're typically the same sort of schemes that we've seen released previously by other brands, but not on the interactive 777, which I really like. So Yeah, these don't necessarily interest me that much, but in some ways I think they're excellent, and they certainly will look grand on any diorama setup with the interactive aspect. So even though this flying into the future CO2 neutral scheme is pretty tedious, it still is going to be an excellent model, and I'll put this one into high flyer. And the last model coming soon this month is a United Airlines Battleship Grey 777 N777 UA with big Boeing 777 titles, which I believe were used just prior to delivery. This should, again, much like that 777-900, should be an awesome model. The mould is excellent in this case, unlike the 737, and everything about it should scream quality, except just like the Battleship Grey version of this they released in September last year, which didn't have the big 777 titles, they've completely bodged up the placement of the cockpit windows. And they are too high and too big, and they just don't look good. In fact, they look really quite bad. So bad that it's scotched any interest that I had in acquiring this model, which is a real shame, because otherwise it's a model that I would be quite keen to get hold of. So that's a serious disappointment for me. When you get the cockpit windows wrong, it kind of destroys the model, in my opinion, and in this case I think they have. And I'm going to put this one down in the gas guzzler because that's a significant mistake. And again, another quite large disappointment. Both those gas guzzle models could easily be supersonics if JC had done a better job on the mould and the printing. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the 7 models which are going to come out soon. Now we're moving into future release territory, so, you know, give up guessing when these are going to show up. It could be any time. The first one is a VASP of Brazil, 737-200, registered PP Sierra Mike Charlie. This one's got the polished belly. But there have been a pair of VASP 737s announced for BR Diecasts of Brazil, which are going to be using the JC mold. So you get the feeling this is that variant release again, even though the BR Diecast ones still haven't come out either. And additionally, this is the old Gemini Jet 737-200, which is one of the oldest molds in 400 scale, has really misshapen engines, and overall just isn't a great 737-200, certainly dramatically inferior to the Aero Classics version. So, yeah, overall, because this is basically a re-release of what BR Diecast are going to produce, and the mold isn't great, you know, I'm going to put it into workhorse, you know, and of course we don't know when it's going to show up anyway. There was artwork, at least for that model, as you probably noticed, but for the remainder here, it's just a photograph of the real aircraft. So these ones are much further down the line, I think, even than the VASP. First one up is an Ethiopian 77 MAX 8. ET Alpha Victor Lima is the registration. I think this is actually a really good selection choice. There have been a couple of MAX 8 Ethiopians previously, both by Aero Classics on what is frankly a very poor MAX mould. The JC Wings Max mould is much better, and this should be a significantly improved version over those previous releases. Of course, who knows when it's going to show up? That's the only problem I have here. So a great choice, I think, for this model, but I can't supersonic it because I just don't know when it's going to show up. But I am quite happy to put this one up into high flyer. I think this will be really nice, and it's always good to see African releases, even if Ethiopian is a fairly obvious choice nowadays. Model number 10 keeps us in Africa. It's not often you can say that, but takes us to the south. This one is a TAAG Angola Airlines 7879 D2 Tango Echo Quebec. This aircraft is going to be available, or this model is going to be available in flaps up and down variants, and that's always nice to see. It has been released by Phoenix. They released a version in March, and that turned out looking pretty decent. This one arguably will be better because the mould is so much better, but again you've got this issue that you just don't know when it's going to show up. The updated Angola livery, it's okay. It's not quite as nice as the previous, but it's still nice and still quite exotic. I'm going to put this one up in the high flyer as well, but obviously not sure when the model will show up. Model number 11 is a rare foray into a United States airline livery, and this one is a FedEx, or a Federal Express as it was still at the time, McDonnell Douglas MD-11, registered N604 Foxtrot Echo. This is wearing the purpley top version of the full title scheme, and there haven't been a lot of these made in the scale. There's one made by Phoenix in November 2022, and there have been of some very old Dragon release versions made as long ago as 2006, and not a lot in between. Almost all the other FedEx MD-11s that have been made by Gemini, and they are in the more modern scheme. So this one ostensibly should be really nice, but there are some significant concerns about the age of the mould and the ability of JC to get the cockpit windows print correct. This would be so much better if it was the Panda Models mould, and that's my problem here. To the extent that I'm not really willing to buy the JC Wings MD-11 anymore, even though I do think it is slightly better than the Phoenix. They're both so old, and they're so inferior to the Panda versions. So I'm going to put this one into workhorse. This one, yeah, it's almost a high flyer, but no, I don't think so. I'm going to workhorse this one. That leaves us with 4 models to discuss, and they are all Airbuses. First one up is a A330-300 P2F, a converted freighter for Saudi cargo, and the registration of this one is EILKD. Interesting to see the retro-y style Saudi livery on the A330 here, and it does look quite nice in the pictures that I'm seeing. Will somebody else make this before JC Wings gets their model out? I think it's highly likely, and I've already talked about the limitations of the JC A330 mould, so even though this one looks like it should be really nice, I'm only going to make it workhorse because we've got that long lead time, pretty ordinary mould, and someone else would like to produce it ahead of them. The next model is staying in the Middle East, and it's Jordanian. It's a Royal Jordanian A320neo, JY Romeo Alpha Kilo, and it's wearing the One World livery. Now this again would be a really good release if it wasn't for the inherent weakness of the JC Wings A320neo with those gigantic engines, which I've talked about way too many times to keep on talking about now. So there's not a lot to say here. Phoenix did make an A320neo for Jordanian not long ago, but it wasn't in the One World scheme. I think that this is going to be given gas guzzler just because of the low quality of the mould, and again, that big lead time. So it's not exciting me. That leaves us just 2 models to discuss, and the next one is another all-new aircraft. In this case, it's the Starlux A350-1000, which has got this kind of carbon fibery style tail, B58551. This again comes in flaps up and flaps down, but again has been announced already by somebody else, and that somebody else in this case is Aviation 400, who just announced this model themselves. It will almost certainly get made by NG as well, I would have thought, and that would surely, the options to get both of those others would surely render this JC Wings one a bit irrelevant, because the mould isn't as good as either the Aviation 400 or the NG version. So again, it's not doing much for me. It's just a workhorse model because the mould is ordinary and it's a long way off from being released. And the last model of the month is a Chinese model, and it's the only pure Chinese model this month actually, and that's a Sichuan Airlines A330-200. This one is in a new special scheme for the 2025 World Games being held in Chengdu, which is obviously, I think, the home base for Sichuan Airlines. It looks very much like quite a lot of the other Sichuan schemes around nowadays, and a lot of the special schemes for Sichuan. You've got some funky little animals on the front, motifs, no doubt the mascots for the games. It looks like a monkey and a panda, not very original. And you've got swirly lines and colours, and it looks fairly nice. It's a perfectly good scheme. Someone else is going to make this way before this JC release gets out, and they're going to make it better. And that someone's going to be Phoenix, and that someone's going to be Henshin Models. So no point worrying yourself about this version. It's going to be out so far behind everyone else's that it becomes irrelevant, and therefore I'm going to put it in the workhorse again. I will almost certainly get this release when somebody else makes it sooner and on a better mold. And that is it for this month's August JC Wings announcements. It's very symptomatic, this set of JC Wings in 2025. The 7 models that are going to come out soon are largely just re-releases of models they've made beforehand, and where they're not especially good. That Boeing House Colors 77900 is a significant disappointment. The poor cockpit printing on the United is a disappointment. And of the others, the Cathay Dragon, the Malaysia, the Swiss, the Air Canada, even the Lufthansa, in fact all of them are really just variant releases of models they've made previously, just slightly different. The future releases show some interest, but again, JC don't really care what their strongest molds are, and they're not really looking at that. So you're still getting, 77200s on a weak mold, an MD-11 on a weak mold, A330s on a weak mold, A320neos on a weak mold, A350s on a weak mold. In fact, they're all weak except for the Max and the Dreamliner, which are the only models which are escaping out of workhorse aside from the Lufthansa Cargo 777. So JC Wings, I'd like to see them focus on the quality molds that they have. They've got lots, and use those well, and not just spam, in a sense, the collectorate with large numbers of very mediocre and ordinary models, most of which have been made better by somebody else. So far it's not been a great year for JC Wings. They've only released a small number of actual models, and they've got a huge number of future releases. A good chunk of those aren't great anyway. So yeah, not the most spectacular set this month. I'm not thinking of getting any of these models, to be honest. It'll be interesting to see if they do anything different in the remaining 4 months of the year, and if this release sets pick up. Good diversity, but not great models. Okay guys, well, thank you very much for watching. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time, but it's goodbye from now from Yesterday's Airlines. Goodbye.